So, welcome. We're going to continue in the 2 Corinthians series. Today and next week, we're going to talk about credentials of a committed Christian. Today's scripture, we're going to look at 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verses 16 through 31. And I chose now I got to remember modern English.
You got modern English version.
Modern English version. All right. I say again, let no one think that I am a fool. Otherwise, at least receive me as a fool, so that I also may boast a little. What I speak not according to the Lord, but as if it were foolishly, in this confidence of boasting. Seeing that many boast according to the flesh, I also will boast, for you tolerate fools gladly, seeing yourselves are wise. For you permit it if a man brings you into bondage, if a man devours you, if a man takes from you, if a man exalts himself, or if a man strikes you on the face. I say to my reproach that we were too weak for that. But whenever anyone is bold, I speak foolishly, I am bold also. Are they Hebrews? So am I. Are they Israelites? So am I. Are they the seed of Abraham? So am I. Are they servants of Christ? I speak as a fool. I am more, in labors more abundant, in stripes above measure, in prisons more frequently, in deaths often. 5 times I received from the Jews 40 lashes minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I suffered shipwreck. A night and a day I have been in the deep. In journeys often, in perils of water, in perils of robbers, in perils by my own countrymen, in perils by the Gentiles, in perils in the city, in perils in the wilderness, in perils in the sea, in perils among false brothers, in weariness and painfulness and sleeplessness often, in hunger and thirst, in fastings often, and in cold and nakedness. Besides the external things, the care of all the churches pressure me daily. Who is weak, and am I not weak? Who is led into sin, and am I not distressed? If I must boast, I will boast of the things which concern my weakness. The God and the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, who is blessed forevermore, knows that I am not lying. That is the word of the Lord. So here's a question. If you were arrested for being a Christian, would there be enough evidence to convict you? If a private investigator were put on your trail every day to examine your lifestyle, what evidence would emerge? There should be some unmistakable credentials that prove your faith beyond a shadow of a doubt. I remember as a teenager, we did a mock rapture, and we didn't know it was happening, but our parents did, and it was weird because my mom was like, make sure you wear sweatpants tonight to bed. I usually wore shorts and a t-shirt, but it was a cold fall night, and she was like, wear sweatpants. And my youth pastor and his wife showed up, and they came in my room, and they woke me up, and they took a flashlight, and they examined my room. And they were like, this is the day of the Lord. The rapture is happening. Are you worthy? They looked around my room, and I'm thinking to myself, nope. At that time, I was going to church, but I was also dabbling in the black arts. I had books of Edgar Allan Poe and black magic and the occult. And they took me anyways. But I'm thinking if it was real, I probably wouldn't have been so lucky at that time. It was definitely not a typical Christian reading list. So in this letter, the Apostle Paul was forced to prove his credentials as a Christian leader. False teachers, who we heard about a couple weeks ago from Michelle, who were claiming to be superior to Paul were undermining his credibility. They ridiculed Paul as unqualified to lead. These false teachers were leading some of the Corinthians astray from the true gospel. So in this letter, Paul attempted to reestablish his credibility, right? He felt very comfortable talking about himself, because it didn't sound like the Lord. Sorry, he felt very uncomfortable talking about himself. He felt very uncomfortable talking about himself because it didn't sound like the Lord, right? When we're out there and we're talking, right, we're not as eloquent as Jesus was, right? We don't always have the scriptures at our fingertips. We don't sound like we should. He felt like it sounded like boasting, but he reluctantly did so, not to exalt himself, but to save the weak Corinthian believers from being led into false teaching. In Proverbs 26:5, we read, "Answer a fool according to his folly, or he will be wise in his own eyes." Right? Sometimes you have to answer people where they are. So we see in verse 16, "I repeat, let no one take me for a fool. But if you do, then receive me just as you would a fool, so that I may do a little boasting." Right? So Paul had to debate with them on a very shallow level. Right? So in this passage, we will see 4 credentials of being a committed Christian. We're going to talk about 2 today, and Pastor Paul will talk about the other 2 next week. And this section will help us examine the depth of our commitment. So if you're a young Christian, these are the goals towards which you should aspire. If you've been a Christian for a long time, here's the proof of your faith. So the first thing, Paul had integrity in his relationship with people. Right? Beginning in verse 20, Paul documents how false teachers were being dishonest with the Corinthians. It says, "In fact, you even put up with anyone who enslaves you or exploits you, or takes advantage of you, or pushes himself forward, or slaps you in the face." They were leading these Christians back into the bondage of the Old Testament rules of eating meats, observing feasts, and Sabbath regulations. Shallow people are always vulnerable to being enslaved by rules. Back when I was younger, I was probably 20. I was 20. I had met this person, and she happened to be a Jehovah's Witness, and she invited me to come with her husband. And I went. And I attended, not just once or twice, but I attended for almost a year. They make you feel a part of. They suck you in, right? They have you read the Watchtower magazine and their Jehovah's Witness Bible, and they call you brother or sister. And it came to a point where my friend was like, "You need to choose between Jehovah and your lifestyle." Now, at that time, I was still actively, drinking and partying. So it wasn't that hard to say, "See you later." And that's the one time I was grateful that I was in active addiction, because it got me out of there. It saved my life in that moment. It saved my soul. It took a few more decades to get in recovery, but at that moment, I got out of bondage. And I wasn't the only one. There's many out there, but there's a gentleman who actually wrote about it. His name was William J. Chanel, and it's called 30 Years a Watchtower Slave. And he talks about his experience as a Jehovah's Witness and what it took for him to walk away. Paul is saying this, right? That cults can enslave you. Can't you see they're leading you into bondage? They were milking the Corinthians of their money. They are always people who are vulnerable to being exploited because of greedy motives of their leaders. We see in Mark chapter 12, verses 38 through 40, Jesus said, "Watch out for the teachers of the law. They devour widows' houses, and for a show they make lengthy prayers. Such men will punish more severely." Because it is profitable, some lead people away and exploit them. Paul goes on to say they take advantage of you. The word picture is of a fish, right? We can all picture a fish in our head, right? Bernie, I know you can. Picture a fish in your head on that hook. They bait that hook so we grab it. They make it look shiny, like a lure, right? It looks appealing. They promise prosperity and family unity and freedom. But they're just opportunistic. They want to hook you and destroy you. He says they push themselves forward. They're not interested in you. They only want to promote their own egos, and they abuse you. He said they slap you in the face. Many teachers in the first century would hit their students to show their superiority and to keep them under subjection. I had a freshman teacher, little Italian guy, right? I would come in for homeroom and I would have him for social studies first period, so I was like, oh, it's a good nap time. I'd put my head down on the desk. He wouldn't hit me, but he would slap that ruler so hard on the desk, I stood up. You know, he was trying to tell me he was the teacher. This is his classroom. It is not nap time.
I accidentally fell asleep in my class so I grabbed the key.
We've all been there. So the false teachers in the church were publicly embarrassing some of the Christians by hitting them or insulting them. I don't think there's much of that going on today, at least not here in the U.S. You know, we're pretty privileged, but there are some countries that it still goes on. But some Christians are absolutely intimidated by their leaders. Some groups take the Bible teaching of shepherding to the extreme. The people are not allowed to do anything until they get an okay from their shepherd. They can't move. They can't change jobs. They can't even remodel their homes. Every decision has to be okayed before they can do something. The people tremble at the concept of going contrary to what their shepherd says. People are still vulnerable and still gullible to false teachers. But Paul says that one of his credentials as an apostle was that he had not manipulated his followers, right? In verse 21, we read, "To my shame, I admit that we were too weak for that." That's sarcasm. He says, "You may think my gentleness was weakness. That isn't true. I was honest among you. I didn't try to exploit you or try to take advantage of you." One of the strongest credentials of a Christian should be integrity. You know, there's a couple of people in my life that, you know, all these things swirl around them. You know, these false stories, this gossip saying they're awful and that they can't do the right thing. But their integrity holds. That's someone I want to look up to. That's someone I want to watch. When the world is swirling, their integrity holds. It should be obvious to the world. We're living in a time of a moral breakdown. There's no doubt about it. We see the loss of values in government, in athletics, in the church. Everywhere we look, we can see the loss of value. The motto seems to be, do unto others before they do unto you. Right? We see that every day on the news. Some people think you have to lie, cheat, and steal, or you aren't going to be able to get ahead in this world. There's a story about a man applying for insurance, right? The agent asked, how old is your mother? The gentleman said, she's dead. How old was she when she died? 41. What did she die of? Tuberculosis. How old is your father? Oh, he's dead. How old was he when he died? 41. What did he die of? A heart attack. The agent just tore up the form. He said, you're a terrible risk. There is no way you can get insurance. Your hereditary is too bad, right? We've all answered those questions, right? So the man went to another agent who asked the same exact questions, right? These are standard questions. How old is your father? He's dead. How old was he when he died? 94. What did he die of? He was playing polo and fell off the horse. How old is your mother? Oh, she's dead. How old was she when she died? 91. What did she die of? Childbirth. I probably would have come up with a different answer besides childbirth, but, he did what he did. And, because he thought he had to lie in order to get this insurance, right? So we have that idea that if we have to twist the truth to get ahead in our world, that's the way the world operates and how people operate. There isn't very much integrity anymore. But the Christian is to be a person of integrity. Excuse me. In Ephesians chapter 4, verse 25, therefore each of you must put off falsehood and speak truthfully to his neighbor. Right? The best definition of integrity I've ever heard is doing what you say you are going to do. In Matthew chapter 5, verse 37, simply let your yes be yes and your no be no. Anything beyond this comes from the evil one. We had we always have some participants that they want recovery. They just aren't quite ready, and they'll be like, pick me up at 8 a.m., I'll be ready. And sometimes that's day after day after day. And then one day they're like, I'm ready. It's a yes. And we go. And that's a good day. But let your yes be yes and your no be no. That means if you vow you will be faithful to your mate till death do you part, you do what you say. Be faithful. If you sign a contract that you will pay a designated amount on the first of the month for a particular item, pay your bill on time. Christians ought to have the best reputation in town. If you take a job and you agree to be at work every morning at 8, you are to be there on time every day. You do a full day's work. Whenever my coworker and I talk about that, and there's this line in Drumline that the band leader says, if you're 15 minutes early, you're on time. If you're on time, you're late. So we always think of that every morning when we're going to work.
I'm going to work on time for 9:30 on days I have to go for 9:30, and 10:30 on Wednesdays, and I have to be there for 10:30.
Beautiful. I love that.
Thank you.
If you say you'll be responsible for a certain task in the church or in the community, do it without having to be prodded or complimented, right? That's integrity. In Luke chapter 16, verse 10, whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much. And whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. Right? Tell the truth, even in the little things. That is one of the characteristics of a mature Christian. The second thing is Paul made painful sacrifices for Christ. Right? The false teachers claimed to be superior to Paul in status. Right? They all thought they were better. In verse 22 we read, are they Hebrews? So am I. Are they Israelites? So am I. Are they Abraham's descendants? So am I. So Paul said, are they Hebrews? He said that they were probably insulting Paul because he couldn't speak Hebrew. But Paul said, I can speak Hebrew. Are they Israelites? So am I. They boasted they are native Palestinians. I came to Jerusalem when I was 12 to sit at the feet of... Thank you.
How did he become that one, Paul?
Because he knows he's a good man. He can say those names like nobody's business. But Paul said, are they bragging they have descendants of Abraham? I can trace my pedigree back to Abraham too. If you are comparing pure Jewish blood, I can stand up to any man. So he hit all those points that they were saying he couldn't. But when it came to providing his credentials as a servant of Christ, Paul didn't talk about his status. He talked about his scars. In verse 23, we read, are they servants of Christ? I am out of my mind to talk like this. I am more. I have worked much harder, been in prison more frequently, been flogged more severely, and been exposed to death again and again. Hard work is one of the credentials. I have been in prison more than any of them. Paul wasn't in prison because he had broken the law. He was in prison because he had preached the gospel. He said, I have been flogged more than any of them. Verse 24, we saw 5 times I received from the Jews the 40 lashes minus 1. Jewish law was that no man could be hit more than 40 times. If a scourger hit a man more than 40 times, he himself was scourged. So when they struck, they would count out loud and stop at 39, just in case they had miscounted. Paul had suffered that scourging of Jews 5 times. Paul says, you want to know my credentials as a leader? He could take off his shirt and show his scars on his back, where he was lacerated because he dared to preach Christ. Verse 25, we read, 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I spent a night and a day in the open seas. I actually, in the classes I was taking in biblical interpretation, it actually talked about the stoning. They literally threw him over a wall and threw the rocks down at him. They thought he was dead. Christ had another idea. He was alive. And he came back, and you know what he did? He preached again. He told them the word once more. You know, it talks about bobbing up and down, holding on to a log, all of his belongings lost, wondering if he was going to live. Paul had to wonder at times, why if I'm doing God's will, why doesn't God protect me better? Right? It wouldn't be that hard to slip into that thinking, right? I'm doing this all for Christ, and all I'm getting is scars and beaten and stoned and left out in the sea, right? You know, and not only that, it stated in verse 26, I have been constantly on the move. He couldn't even settle down. He was always moving. There was not a man looking for a nice town in which to live. Paul suffered like this because he was an ambassador of the Lord. Right? One credential of a committed Christian should be sacrifice. There ought to be some scars. Now, Paul's experience may seem foreign to us, right? It's not like being in here and, you know, after service we walk out and have the enemy of Christ tie us down and flog us, right? It's foreign to us. We kind of have it easy today. For the forefathers of our country, no sacrifice was too great, right? Thomas Nelson, he was the signer of the Declaration of Independence. That's the guy on the left. He ordered his own home to be bombarded because it was being used as headquarters for General Cornwallis. That's the guy in the red, the British general.
The Patriot really hated him.
Yeah. You know, he had no insurance. He had nothing to protect his home. But he was willing to sacrifice it because he was a patriot. Today we live in a free country because people sacrifice their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. There are still people who are willing to sacrifice for Christ. There is this guy, Bubba Smith. He was known as a Christian, a football player, and an actor. He played Hightower on Police Academy, one of my personal favorites. I thought it was hilarious back in the day. But you know what? He turned down a very lucrative contract with a beer company when he was at the height of his career because he didn't want to entice people to drink. That's pretty stellar, you know? But in the little things, if we are going to be toughened up as genuine believers of Christ, there need to be some scars. You know, it was making me think, we were talking about the Christmas parade that's coming up and how we did one a couple of years ago. And I think it was for the 4th of July or Old Home Day. But we all carried signs, and they said different things. You know, one was, I was an alcoholic, found recovery at the cross. The abused became the abuser, found redemption at the cross. We were willing to hold those signs and walk down the street. Nothing bad happened to us. We got a visitor, a winged visitor. You know, but there was lots of consideration and thought and conversation before we made those signs and walked down the street. Because we were carrying our personal stories. And we didn't know how people were going to react to that. But we have scars. Maybe it's on our calendars, right? Maybe it means you have a scheduled church activity and there is an important ball game and you go to the church activity instead. You make that sacrifice. It means if you have an opportunity to witness to friends or family members and they object, you go on ahead and give testimony, even if they ridicule you. We knew that was a possibility walking down the street with those signs. But we did it anyways, to show how Christ had worked in our lives. It means when the church has a special offering, you sacrifice something, even though you maybe have never done it before. There ought to be some scars. People say, if I sacrifice, that would be a life of misery. No. That would be a life of joy and fulfillment and fellowship. In Matthew chapter 10, verse 38, we read, anyone who does not take his cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Whoever finds his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. Is there really any evidence that you are a Christian? Is there any evidence that I'm a Christian? Are you honest in your relationships with people? Are you self-sacrificing of the things God has entrusted to you? There's a story that illustrates the point. A soldier, a woman, a book, and a rose. Lieutenant John Blanchard was a young soldier stationed in Florida in boot camp during the first part of World War II. One day he was reading through a book he had borrowed from the library. He was so impressed with some of the notes written in the margin He kept reading the notes written in the margin in a woman's handwriting. He was enticed, he was enthralled, he was ingrained in these notes. They were so tender and so thought-provoking. He looked back at the flyleaf and saw the previous owner of the book was a woman named Hollis Mano. He did some research and found her address up in New York. He wrote her a letter telling her how much he appreciated her insight in this book. The next day, he was shipped overseas. But it didn't end there. For the next 13 months, John and Hollis corresponded. They developed a tremendous relationship. They realized they had so much in common, and they realized they were falling in love with someone they had never even seen. Lieutenant Blanchard asked Hollis if she would send a picture, but she refused, saying, "If you really cared about me, it wouldn't matter what I look like. It's character and what is on the inside that counts." So after 13 months, the day finally came that he was to meet her. They had made arrangements to meet at the Grand Central Station in New York City at 7 p.m. She said, "You can identify me by the red rose that I will be wearing on my lapel." Lieutenant Blanchard waited with anticipation. Finally, a group of people got off the train and was coming towards him. Out in front was a beautiful, slender, blonde woman who had all kinds of poise and beauty. She wore a pale green dress. His heart nearly leaped out of his chest. He started towards her, but then he noticed she did not have a red rose in her lapel, even though she was looking directly at him. As she went by, she was, with a provocative smile, she said, "Going my way, soldier?" He said everything in him wanted to follow that blonde girl. But right behind her, he saw Hollis. Over 40 years of age, graying hair, vastly overweight, but wearing a red rose in the lapel of a wrinkled coat. She had gray eyes and a kindly expression. He was kind of disappointed. He said everything about me wanted to chase after that blonde woman who was disappearing. But he remembered the relationship they had developed through those letters. And even though this probably wouldn't develop into marriage, he realized maybe it would develop into something very meaningful in the way of a friendship and companionship. Something better, maybe. So without hesitation, he handed her the book, which identified him to her. He reached for her bag and said, "Are you willing to go to dinner?" She said, "Young man, I don't know what this is all about, but that blonde woman begged me to put on this red rose and said that if you asked me out to eat, you were to meet her in the restaurant across the street. She said it was some kind of test." Lieutenant John Blanchard passed the test. Would you? He passed the test of being a person of integrity, doing what he said he would do. He was willing to sacrifice something that seemed immediately pleasurable. Would you? Would I? In Matthew 16, verse 25, "For whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for me will find it." That's what Jesus did for us. He said, "I have come to seek and to save the lost." He did what he said he was going to do. And he went to the cross and sacrificed his all for us. He could have taken the flogging and been like, "Yep, nope, I'm done. I don't want to do this." But he followed his Father. And he did his will. And that's what he asks, that we follow him. And these credentials mark a genuine believer. I know it's hard, right? It's easy to get sucked into this world, into the gossip, into the hearsay, into the news. Nobody knows what to believe anymore. But one good thing is, his holy word has never changed. He has never changed. And we can completely have faith in that and know that He is coming back for us. And all He asks is that we be a confident Christian that stand up for Him.